Well, it started as a normal disruption for a lot of users out there who thought that they're having a challenge with their service provider. But later, we came to realize that indeed it's a bigger challenge than what we thought. I'm talking about the internet disruptions that hit us many people out there. But have we put in place the right structures to maybe absorb the shocks that we might face as a country, or still the challenge might persist? If tomorrow there's a similar challenge with respect to the subsea cable that many of these telcos and internet service providers are dependent to supply that reliable data services to you. Well, on PM Express Business, they should be looking at those internet disruptions, lessons learned, solutions, and even impact on the industry, getting a better understanding of what happened and whether we put in place the right structures to ensure that we don't be hit by this challenge again. Well, I'll be engaging some industry persons who appreciate the issues. Ken Ashibey is the Chief Executive of the Ghana Telecoms Chamber, and also Eric Osiakwan, somebody who really appreciates the industry, understand the industry, the telecom industry when it comes to engineering and all those things. He will join us via Zoom, and also the commercial banks. They are not spared of this challenge. We'll be engaging the Chief Executive of the Association of Banks, that is Mr. Johnny Wah. All these issues wrapped up here on PM Express Business Edition. Right back after this break. Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. As we talk about Ghana's internet disruptions, how do we manage the shocks and solutions going forward? Well, indeed, I'm privileged to have with me in studio here, that is engineer Dr. Kenneth Ashibey. He is Chief Executive of the Telecoms Chamber, and also Mr. Johnny Wah, Chief Executive of the Association of Banks, and also Eric Osiakwan. He is joining us via Zoom all the way in New York to participate in this discussion. Gentlemen, I do appreciate your time so much. But so let me start first with the bankers, because it appears you guys were quite hit hard because you are being heavy on more of branchless, online banking and all the rest. How bad is the situation then for your members and even the commercial banks?
Yeah, thank you very much. Of course, as you have described, quite, the exact situation that we experienced on the Thursday in particular, exactly a week today. It was tough, and the unfortunate thing is that because there was no the warning or some advance notice, you all realized all of a sudden that you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, and you started making calls until it became clear that there was a bigger problem. But the good thing about the banks was the fact that the banking system itself was okay because it is more or less localized, and I'm sure Dr. Ashibey will spend some time to explain to you why locally we were kind of okay. So if you walk to a banking branch, you were able to do your transactions. But unfortunately, we made life so easy for all of us. We are in a connected world. People are able to transact seamlessly. They sit in their offices and they are able to do business. They sit in their homes. They are able to do their banking. Those services, though the banking infrastructure or the banking platform was available, the unfortunate situation was that in order to communicate to the platform, you needed to ride on the power of internet. And when internet is not functioning, then though the bank is active, you will not be able to reach the bank to execute any transaction. And that is the primary problem that the banking system had.
Let me bring in Dr. and Engineer. And I know you've been in this industry for a while, and as an engineer as well, I, on that day, was thinking that maybe I'm out of credit and all those things. I was struggling all over to get things done. For you, how did the thing hit you? I mean, even though you're in an industry where it's just a call away, you can appreciate what is happening.
Well, so the interesting thing is that I was not well. So I was on the sick bed, but there are few things I do myself. Generally, when I used to run the technology for radio and multimedia. I had 2 radio sets. Then in Accra, there was a Dome and Joy FM. I had 2 radio sets I sleep with. When any of them went off, I woke up. So you see how I was spending. So for here as well, my phones have various networks. And so I have ways of communicating to myself from one to the other, talking in terms of data, my mail server, and the Gmails I had and all of that. So it was early in the morning when I tried my normal morning routines, and then I realized that it was a bit sluggish, it was a bit slow. But because I was sick, I was not really that plugged in until I got the call to say, this is what is happening. That's quite early in the morning. And so then, initially for some of the cables, for example, for SAT3, for example, the thought was that it was a power problem, a power amplifier problem. But then when it was resolved, you realized that the problems were still there. Then the other cables, you really needed to find out what was happening. And this thing that we're talking about, from Accra to Kumasi, I don't know how many kilometers that is. But the distance between...
40.
So the distance between all the cables is about 160 kilometers. If we put all the distances apart. And for all of that to be hit at the same time really is very unprecedented. I remember in 2020 when the challenges happened with the fiber. The NCA then calls all the telcos and say that, you know what? You might have MTN, you might have WAX, Vodafone, you have your SAT3 you sit on. But I want you to be connected to 3. So you are saying that have a backup of the backup. So all of that was thought of, including NCA's directive of distributing your load and all of that. So when you get to the situation where you're beginning to know that ACE has gone down, SAT3 has gone down, Main 1 is also gone down, so 4 different cables going down, then you start wondering what it is. And I'm saying the ships have set sail, to where the fault is. So I am just waiting for the first divers to get down there, or for them, the ships to get there and be able to see what has actually happened.
So, engineer, have you been able to establish, based on preliminary data, what was the cause of this problem?
So what has been done is that remotely, the root cause that they are beginning to think about is some geological movement that might have happened. But the extent of this geological movement that would be able to impart a width of a total of 160 kilometers is an interesting thing that we would want to see. And the depth at which this thing is happening, about 3 kilometers. So it would really be, at least you're able to rule off based on these things that you've seen remotely, that it will be difficult for you to say that this was deliberate, this was something other than an act of God. And and again, that's why I say I'm waiting to see what the first divers, or when the ship gets there, what they will be able to see when they look down. I'm sure that whatever it is that might have taken all these 4 cables down, if it had happened on land, by now the number of casualties will be massive. So we really need to see this. This definitely is unprecedented. The only thing the NCA did not do, apart from asking people to move, you have capacity on that particular cable. In 2020, I think that was in May 2020. There you have capacity on, so MTN, you have capacity on WAX. Telecel, you have capacity sitting on SAT3. But then asks you to make sure you get a redundancy on a redundancy. That was quite expensive. The only thing we maybe should have looked at was saying that don't then have all of it to the west, but then also consider cables originating from the east. So you saw for AT, for example, they had supplies that were originating from the east, so they were not affected. The Aqueduct cable, for example, was not affected. So this really was unprecedented. But then there are things that we have been talking about that we should have done that we've not done. I am hoping...
And I'll be coming more to that. So for you said that the vessel has set sail.
Sail, yes.
All other things being equal, when are they going to get there, and then work is going to start on it?
I don't have the numbers yet, because those mobilization would have done in Europe, So I'm pretty sure I don't know when they set sail. That's the most, I got to know today that because I wanted confirmation that they actually have moved. So I got confirmation today that they have moved. I should have asked when they moved. So then you'll be able to estimate, from Europe to Cote d'Ivoire, how long that would take. But I'm sure, give and take, in a few days, they would get there. Yes.
I want to bring in one individual who has helped in building subsea cable for other countries, a tech consultant to UN, World Bank, and Eric Kosiakwan. He's joining us live from New York. Eric, thank you so much for your time as well. And for somebody who's worked in this space, helped build this cable for other countries and all the rest, were you surprised by this development? Or it's something that is always bound to happen? So you know something, you build in the required shock absorbers to minimize the impact of this.
Good evening to your Western listeners. It's a pleasure to be on. I think that this was bound to happen. If you look at subsea cables around the world, you look at the history of subsea cable development, essentially things like this happen, and it's a wake-up call to build resilience. So the way I explain this, for example, is we already anticipate COVID. One of the things that COVID taught us is that unexpected incidents can happen, and we have to build resilience against such unexpected incidents. So this particular incident, I don't want to go into root cause, etc., but what it's telling us is that we need to build strong resilience into our internet infrastructure. And we need to do it in ways that can overcome such shocks. And so for me, that is what we need to focus our attention on. How do we build such resilience so that we can avoid this in the future?
But I'm coming back to the question about, Engineer Kenashibe was explaining to us how widespread these cables were and everything. And for people like you who work in building some of these things, what were some of the insurance and the shock absorbers you put in place for some of these infrastructures so that when there's a force majeure or whatever, we don't feel the impact that bad?
Right. So there are a couple of things. Subsea cables are one way by which we build the internet infrastructure. You also can build to satellite, and then you can use, wireless spectrum radios, right? For the main backhaul infrastructure between continents, generally, fiber is used. You can use satellite. You can use satellite to go to remote places. So you need to build this infrastructure along this route in multiple cases. In the case of the subsea cable infrastructure that we currently have, the reason this has happened is that these subsea cables have been interrupted, even though they are very wide apart. As Engineer Shigbe said, when these were being built, the plan was to have them apart so that, if one goes down, the other one will be resilient. So this has happened where even though they were very much apart, three of them went down. And because there's three of them that went down, we really felt the impact. So that's really where we need to now think about resilience in a different way. That, some of the cables, if you take a piano, for example, wasn't affected because the architecture of how it was built allowed it to be resilient to sort of this kind of development. So you need the architecture of building these cables needs to take into consideration these incidents so that the resilience that is built into the cable architecture can allow us to survive such incidents going forward.
I'll come to my guest here, but again, Eric Kosiakwan can help me, and Engineer, I'll come back to you as well. 101, why do we have to build cables under sea or seabed to connect intercontinent to get internet access? Can't we have our own local wide area network here in Ghana? Help me out to appreciate this, and then as simple as it is, and break it down.
Yeah, let me get into how the internet infrastructure. The internet is a network of networks. So you're right. Locally, we build infrastructure that allows us to talk to each other, as in the local providers and also the local networks, right? And so in Ghana, we built the Ghana Internet Exchange. It's a connection point between most of the operators so that you can keep local traffic local. So that's one infrastructure that you need to build. That infrastructure also means that you have to have terrestrial fiber networks, wireless radios that goes to remote places. So if you have ISP-A, let's say in Sakumono, an ISP-B in Makati Hill, an ISP-C in Kumasi, you need to be able to build physical fiber networks, which we call terrestrial fiber, to connect those nodes via an exchange point, which is the internet exchange. Now, that's local infrastructure. Then you need to connect that to the global internet. So in other countries, they also have the same thing. So when you connect all of them, then you get the internet, right? So to connect Africa to the rest of the world, we go through subsea cables, or we go to satellite links, right? The thing is that satellite links, that technology is growing today. We have, modern day satellite links that have, very good latency, the same way you can compare it to fiber. And so there's more and more MEO and GEO satellites that are going to space that allows us to be able to provide connectivity via space, right? Space technology, as you know, is developing rapidly. The same way subsea fiber infrastructure is so developing rapidly. So there's a lot happening in those areas, and you need a combination of those different connectivity mediums to create a robust infrastructure. So it's not a question of fiber is not good, and therefore we should go to satellite. No, it's a question of we need to build resilience using all of them and using wireless technologies as well to create an infrastructure where when there's a break here, we can route the traffic through other places. So as you can see, with this break, there's 3 fiber cables that are down, 4 of them. But the internet is still functioning, just that it's not as fast, right? So what it means is that if there were many other routes for us to then send the traffic, this would not be as felt as it is. So some of these fiber cables have gone down. In the past, we had 1 go down at a time, and we don't feel it as much. The reason that we're feeling it as much this time is because 3 or 4 of them have gone down at the same time, right? And they carry a lot of traffic. And that's why we're feeling it.
I see. Let me come in, and I'll come back to you about the argument about satellites and the cost implications and all those things. But engineer, as well, I mean, for some people, are they right to say that the telcos didn't build in the required shock absorber? And I want to break these things down because I'm getting confused in this technology space.
Let me take what Eric said. So would you say that as the world, we did not build the right shock absorbers when COVID hit us? No. Yeah. You see, and Eric talks about Equinox the way it's been structured. I'm waiting to get down there to see why that cable did not go down. Because in as much as we engineer and all of that, different things could happen. So I'm really waiting to get the really root cause of the reason why all of these cables failed. So it's not because, and again, if you look at in April, on the 30th of April 2020, what the NTA had asked, various operators to do, talking about from the emergency point of view, all MNOs and self-line should establish and maintain physical cable connections with at least 3 submarine cables. 3. And then it talks about the fact that making sure that all of these were available 24 hours. So in terms of working together with the NCA, with industry, a lot of work had been done. But you see, when you engineer, and again, it's just like your COVID situation, nobody really thought that at some point we're going to park all our airlines and no movement was going up. You normally would engineer for, when you draw the Ogive curve, the middle part of it, not your extremes. So to get 4 cables really going down, really, in terms of the cable, but maybe the question to ask is that why is it? And let me give you an example of one of the national assets. If you take the GIPS network, on that day, GIPS was working perfectly. You know the reason?
I don't know, help me out.
GIPS have their servers sitting locally in Ghana. So some of the conversation we should be...
So that is the way to go, maybe, as a backup as well?
So it's a mixture of things. Like what Eric has said, we need to work in making sure that we are interconnected properly so that we can pool resources locally when the things happen. We should also make sure we are interconnected in the sub-region. What would have happened is that if all our electric pylons that we have, and VRA, even before Gridco came, had fiber sitting on top of these pylons years ago.
And it's still working.
Yes, it's still working. So if, for example, in Ghana, the interconnections between Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Niger, Togo, Abidjan, and all of that, we had terrestrial fiber interconnected. What would have happened is that when your West had a problem, you could easily have pooled resources from the East. Currently, Eric is not here, but our internet is good to the extent that we're able to sit with him and do a Zoom call. Currently, the speeds are back, but the speeds are back using not our regular connections. So there are various different connections. To the extent that some of the connections go to Angola, move from Angola to Brazil, to the US, to be able to connect.
So that is what is up. I mean, you are telling me that things have improved now. I mean, because of what you now web backup system
yes.
or what? What is happening that now we've seen some improvement? What has the telcos done for us to experience what we're experiencing right now?
So you remember that when the chamber issued its first statement, there are two things we said we're going to do. It will take a while to fix those, and the NCA repeated the same thing. The minister repeated the same thing. We're going to fix those cables. It was going to take a while. But we're going to look for other sources to be able to bring interconnectivity in. So, for example, connections were done into Togo. Now, to be able to, through the Equinox cable, bring some connectivity in here. You've had the likes of ACE, SAT3, Main 1, WAX, all go into various. That's why I'm saying that we had to go all the way to Angola, connect through Angola to Brazil, from Brazil to Europe, through some cables to be able to get some connectivity coming. One of the things that also compounded our problem is that ordinarily, as you went through Angola to South Africa, you would have wanted to use the East Coast. But then you remember that in February or so, 3 cables went down in the Red Sea.
Yeah.
So that route, those cables were also not available for you to complete the loop. So we've had to do some tortuous routes. And that's what has brought capacity in here. Again, as Eric explained, it's about interconnections of interconnected networks. So how do you connect to the hubs, the big hubs globally in Europe, in Americas, in Asia, and all of that? So you've had to use all of these other links. So currently, what we are sitting on, and I think that the industry should be applauded for being able to come back up to speed when these 4 cables are still down.
It's still not as fast as we are.
Completely, because you see, it is like saying that you have these 4 cables that you're connected. Now you are using other means, various interconnections. So we know that we've not gotten to the best yet. The best would be when we reinstall these 4 cables, and then also make sure. And for me, I think so. Apart from ensuring that we have a lot more local service in here, making sure that our cache is here, the internet exchanges that Eric talks about, we need to do a lot more of it here, so that we should not be leaving all, especially our very critical data, just sitting out there on the global internet. Not too long ago, a few years ago, you know what Russia did? Russia cut itself completely from the internet to check their resilience. And whether we like it or not, the internet is a US-based thing. That's where it started from. I can't sit there, so whether you like it or not, as a country, and so we should start ourselves as Ghana to see how do we build resilience not only in our connections, as Eric said, your satellite, your submarine fiber, your terrestrial fiber, and other wireless links that you can do. Do that and also move to the sub-region. Move to the sub-region and also move to Africa-wide. And then finally also make sure those connections are there. But after you've done that, also try and make sure that the exchanges are there such that your mission-critical, infrastructure. So I'm hoping that by the time we're done with it, Ghana Water, ECG, some of our financial systems, our health system, critical ones, at least there should be some dumps that we can keep locally here, so that when these things happen, we can, at least for most of the critical things that we can do them amongst ourselves, do them amongst ourselves as ECOWAS, do them amongst ourselves as Africa, and then be able to bring the global thing. That resilience has to be built.
Mr. Well, for you as banks, some would say that looking at where you sit, we should also expect that you have the necessary stocks in place so that you're not hit that badly. What is the case in the banking situation about the reserves, if I can use that layman's term, so that when these things happen, your operation doesn't grind to a halt?
Yeah, just as has been explained already, as banks, we are a heavily regulated industry, and the central bank's eyes are very much open on our activities. So, as part of our business continuation assessment and the plans that we've been asked to put in place, you cannot have just one, a primary provider and just a secondary. A lot of the banks have your normal connectivity, which is mostly fiber, and then some have radio as a secondary redundancy line, and then they have, in some cases, satellite. So you have 3 built-in resilience. So when the issue came and some of the networks, even locally, were having some wobbly kind of connection, some of the banks were able to fail over quickly to other channels in order to get the service going. And as I said, at the banking hall, at the bank level, the services were available. But of course, now banking services is not what you can provide at your branch. It's what the customer can do sitting where they are. And as Ken mentioned earlier, most of these plug-in systems and third-party applications and the fintechs the banks work with, they have their applications stored as well. Most of them are in the cloud, and the cloud services with AWS and the others, they are
hosted outside the country.
Yes.
Using the time has come to
of
look
course.
at how we can
So you are ready,
yeah.
But the customer who's supposed to plug into your system is not ready because the network or the pipeline to get to you is broken. So it's a very simple thing. You can be as ready as you are or you like. You can invest in whatever systems, but if you are going to interact with a surrounding system, that system's connectivity must also be such that it can hit you. And the danger is for financial services, is you go and, the connectivity is back, and then you execute a transaction, it goes through a channel. And if through the process, the transaction doesn't get or hit the bank, and there is a communication break, that transaction gets truncated. And then all of a sudden, you have a situation where somebody's at the ATM, maybe with a bank A card, using a bank B ATM platform, and you find, your account has been debited, but there's no cash. Yeah. Because there's a communication you don't see between that ATM you are using and the bank that issued you the ATM. We call it the issuer ATM and then the acquirer. So the bank has issued the ATM card to you, but you are using it or deploying it on another bank's platform. There's a communication behind. And if that communication is affected by what we have just described here, of course, the bank can be 100% uptime. You can't do that.
So in your case, the banks did have built in.
They have it. It is a regulatory requirement
and that is
you
why
cannot fail.
The impact wasn't that bad.
And also because most of the data centers of the banks are local, so there was very little interaction with the external world. But when it comes to the plugins, and now banks are gradually becoming technology companies. So you find a situation where a lot of your transactions are going through pipelines that are provided by others. They are interfacing your infrastructure. You don't know where, but you don't have control over where they store this data or these applications are stored. If they are offshore and it's in another country and you need internet to connect to pick the feed, how do you operate? So that's why you find a situation where at the heat or at the very height of the problem, on Thursday and on Friday, you couldn't do internet banking. You couldn't do your normal banking app applications. None of them were.
So are you worried, for banks that have now moved into the tech space, the virtual space, the impact of this on the confidence in driving people to still... there are banks that are fully 100% virtual, even though they want to encourage people to come to the banking hall. The impact of this on the virtual online banking platform.
So the thing is, I think, when they say to every problem, there's a potential. So we go through problems and then through the solutions, we are able to build better. What is coming out right now is, you can't say I'm a bank, I am very okay. Meanwhile, people are plugging into your system and you're not interested in how they are okay. So if you are signing a contract with a third party, a fintech, the kind of resilience you have built, you must ensure that your partners have similar resilience. So if you have satellite and radio as backups, does your partner have any kind of backup? So if everything is going through fiber, one of the key problems, and when we met the NCA, is the point I raised, that how come as a country, yes, you cannot all of a sudden fail over the entire country's connectivity to satellite. I mean, of course, satellite has its own challenges. But at least for some critical infrastructure, I thought there should be that redundancy that should have been available. Yeah. Not for everything, because you can.
I'll be coming to engineers should be on that one. I'll be coming.
You have the solution to that question. You know, so you're talking about if they gave you satellite failover, but your customers being able to interconnect, they do not get that failover. Then you realize that that system will still
it will still be sitting there, yes, and the connectivity will be low. But I'm talking about other services that are not customer facing. Yeah. You know, there are a lot of backroom services that are business to business, which means it's not like a connectivity from John Awuah trying to use MTN or maybe AT to connect to a bank, but a business that is also more or less required to have that level, that similar level of resilience. The problem is, as a country, do we have that kind of backup redundancy available? I'm not a technical person in this field, but I can say
back to the technical people who are here.
We don't, because all our channels are, deep sea. I mean, as far as
I see engineer shaking his head.
To what extent, as a country, can we say, okay, if there is significant disruption like we have experienced on the fiber, undersea cables, are we able to, as a country, maybe power our airports, our medical facilities, our financial services through satellite? Just these three.
But for the banks, let's focus on the banks. What at the association level mechanisms have you built that tomorrow, if this will happen again next, and it's like a whole month stretch, the banking system will still be solid and protected?
So, I think I've answered that question already, because the thing is, you cannot say you are okay until the partner you are working with is okay.
So on your side, the
banks have the resilience.
That is the assurance that you have all the mechanisms in place.
All 23
that
commercial
data
banks have
and everything. They are resilient.
They have their primary side, their secondary side. Their comms are multi-network. They are not reliant on one channel. They have radio, VSAT, and of course the fiber is the most reliable, and that is what they use for most of the communication. But when there's problems, they are able to fail over quickly to other channels in order.
So that's the assurance. And again, I asked you the question about the confidence bit about, as most of the banks have tried to move the traffic outside the banking hall. Could this be a challenge for you? Are you afraid at the bank level?
Of course, security is everything. And the calls we got from the association was, is my money safe? Can somebody tap into my money? And we had to give that assurance that at the bank level, applications are okay. So anything that goes to frustrate a system that we have all come to, we've come to love it, that you can sit in the comfort of your home and do a transaction, transfer money to you, send money to your mom, or do a transaction or the other, and all of a sudden you are sitting there, you can't do anything. It will frustrate the system a bit. Is it significant enough to affect confidence? I am not sure. And the telcos here, the MNOs, I think I give them credit that yes, it's taking a little bit of more time than we expected, but we are up. More or less, every service that
the consumer will still think that it's a little bit...
It's a bit wobbly. I mean, I've tried a few platforms, because what we do is to also test. Even when we are not doing anything, we just run through a 5 CD, 20 CD transaction on different channels just to test availability of networks. And you still have instances where, transactions truncate at some point.
But I remember, you've given us the assurance that your money is safe and everything, but I remember that you gave an advice earlier on where you were trying to encourage people that for certain transactions, try and move closer to your branch. As we speak right now, would you still tell me that, George, for certain transactions, listen, try and move closer to the physical evidence, the human evidence to the transaction?
No, we issued even an update to the earlier communication. In the heat of the problem where, almost everything was down, it was not the time for you to continue testing and testing and testing. You do one transaction, it has failed, another one, it has failed. And the more you do, the more problems you create for yourself and whoever your trading partner is or your counterparty is. So we issued an advice. a top-up advice where we advise customers that it is safe now because the networks are virtually,
I can go back online as we speak right now.
That advice
I can move,
was issued a day
not USSD, whatever, but I can do the full banking platform. I'm moving
I'm sure you've already
10,000 or 20,000. I could still do the online bank as we speak right now.
You can do. Today I've done an internet transaction on 2 different channels.
Safe?
No problem.
Engineer, do we have a backup?
So let me see. So you are asking the banks.
Yeah.
When the situation happened, if I wanted to access Joy News, your archives was absent. So you see, this conversation is not only about, it's about all of us. For all the services that we're running now, we need to start rethinking the way we do the things that we do. So, but I think the point John makes is the fact that now the networks are up. And it's about even the consumer to the establishment network. They're up. They're virtually up. Even in the times when we're running with the sea cables are not gone down. With Ghana's penchant for cutting fiber cables, those challenges were happening. So I think now the only thing that I would say is that we should bear in mind that we're not using our primary undersea cables. And the point has to be made: over 90% of the world's internet traffic goes through undersea. So when we talk about satellites and all the alternatives, the percentages that are being handled. It is good to, especially mission critical, establishment, have those backups quickly. And then again, for me, I say that in terms of building the backups, we should also, you've done subsea, do terrestrial as well. Because you see,
what is the terrestrial one?
On land. So if you had connections all the way to, say, Burkina Faso, to Mali, to Libya, what would have happened is that you could come via, those on land.
Gridco can do those things.
Yes, but the thing, Gridco can do that internally. What we need to now build is across countries as well, get these interconnected. So those are the things that we need to start seeing that we need to do. Because if 4 cables have gone down, nobody knows what else could happen again in future. So we now need to rethink again the redundancy that we're building. Because again, I'll say to you, that February 2020 meeting that was called by NTA, where they issued a directive in April 2020, they really looked at it to the extent that they said that if your capacity is getting to 85%, you needed to come back to them with an alternate in terms of the way you're going to do it. But now we've been educated. We have seen the fact that we should not only be looking at redundancy in terms of the extra number of cables you have, even the directions in which you're taking your cables also have to be looked at. We also need to start looking at in terms of how internally we are doing our business. One of the reasons why internet data connection in Ghana was expensive was because for everything that we were going to do, you will find out that we were going outside. When the heat happened, a lot of us, our email service failed. Yeah. Because even basic things like email service, we're not sitting in Ghana, we're sitting outside. So we need to start rethinking how all of these things would go so that we can build that national self-sufficiency, which goes beyond just what NCA would do. All the other regulators, we all need to start talking together, working together definitely with the satellite, players, and then also making sure that we're bringing some terrestrial capacity, subsea capacity, different directions, and then together all of us can work. But let me tell you, George, one of the things that we've seen, if water went down, I'm pretty sure all of us found boreholes and tankers to get us water. Electricity went down. All of us who do solar, do the generator. 14th, 15th, when internet went down, what has happened to us? So I think the time has come for all of us that when the ITU says that internet connectivity is a human right, we need to respect that. When we say that it's a utility, we need to respect that. So that when the Cybersecurity Act, 2020 Act 1038, classifies telecommunication infrastructure, and banking infrastructure is also critical information infrastructure, we need to start treating them as that. So when you have somebody building a road, somebody building his house, and they are cutting fiber, we should all know that that would impact on us. The level of fiber cuts is too much, it's grievous, but most of the time, really nobody pays particular attention to it. So it's time that we paid attention to that and gave it the necessary rights it got. When they are doing road construction, they will relocate water, they will relocate electricity at the cost of the project. They will tell the private player that they would have to come and do relocation. Last year, telecom sector, repairing and relocating of fiber cost $6 million. That should stop. We can use that to build all the redundancies and that you're talking about.
This is PM Express Business Edition, and we'll be looking at the internet disruption that hit this country. What are the solutions? And then managing and the solutions. And when we get back into the discussion, we'll be looking at solutions as well. And also be looking at this argument about satellite. And what are the alternatives? I'll be getting back to Eric Osiakwan, who is managing partner at Chanzo Capital, joining us all the way from you. This is PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome to PM Express Business Edition as we look at the internet disruptions. How do we manage the shocks and even solutions? And that is what we'll be going forward, looking at solutions, and ensure that businesses out there, they can ensure that going forward, the challenge will not be that bad going forward. Let me bring in Eric Osiakwan, managing partner at Chanzo Capital and journal from you. Eric, help us. I tried to scan the pricing of satellite, and Starlink is one of them. And I was like, whoa, help me out. Is it really an alternative to this whole subsea cable argument?
Not one or the other, it's both, right? And it's important for you to understand that for each of them, the CapEx investments and the OpEx for running the infrastructure is different. So obviously the pricing will not be the same. Relatively, satellite is much more expensive to put out there and to manage. And so the cost for that is relatively higher. The same way, for example, if you're driving a fiber cable into a rural area, because the economics of that rural area, purchasing power of the inhabitants are not so high. Generally, people will not build fiber there because it will be difficult to justify the cost of putting that much capital into a place where there are not as many customers with the right purchasing power, right? So in that case, you use wireless, which is relatively cheaper and could fall within the purchasing brackets of those communities. So it's different strokes for different folks, depending on what is needed. Now, in terms of the resilience point I was making, we need to build resilience in three very critical ways. The first is that we need to start hosting a lot of the local data locally. What this means is that you have to have data centers on these networks that are hosting the local content locally. With those data centers, you can also have caching of international content. So the Facebooks, the Googles, etc., can be cached locally so that when you are fetching a resource, it's as if it's local, but it has a relay that goes international. So without that local hosting, you still have to go out to come in, right? The second level of resilience you need to build is that the network architecture itself that you build has to have multiple points of failure. In other words, on the terrestrial fiber side and the terrestrial wireless or even satellite, you have to build multiple angles to it so that when there's a break somewhere, the infrastructure still allows things to happen through somewhere else. And then the third is you have to build that resilience into the international networks. So what I'll explain to you now is that we need to do a lot of homework because when you have a critical enough of a structure where a lot of content applications are hosted locally, your need to go into the international networks very more frequently reduces. So for example, if a lot of the international networks are cached locally, a lot of the local applications are local, what it means is that instead of needing 45 gigabits per second to go to international, you may need 10 gigabits, right? And that's what you want to move towards more. So the resilience we are talking about is about behavioral change as much as it is about improving the infrastructure. The last part of it is that we also need to consume more local applications. And this is where I'll put a plug for what I do now. We invest in local entrepreneurs that build local applications that solve local problems. So we should start consuming more and more of this application. I think my colleagues on the panel talked about that. Banking applications are local, so we should use more of those local applications. And so I think that by doing these things, we'll build more resilience. And if something happens like this again, which will happen, George, these things happen.
Oh,
it's not.
You're not being a prophet of doom, right?
Well,
I don't want this to happen again.
Well, the reality of life is that, we will see what the exact details are, but it looks like it's some natural disaster that happened under the bed of the sea, right? So these things, COVID, nobody predicted it, but now we know that we need to be a bit more resilient. We need to wear masks. We need to be more immune to different, viruses. So these things happen for us to learn, and then as humanity, as human race, we build resilience to it, right? So I think that for me, that is what we should learn from this. How do we create a more resilient internet infrastructure in Africa? And that means that we need to host local content. We need to interconnect our networks locally in country and between countries, so that if I'm transferring a resource that is going to somebody in Togo or in Kenya, if a lot of that traffic is going via terrestrial networks on the continent, then if there's an international cut, I will not feel the pain as much. You get it? The example I was giving was that these cables have been cutting. We've had incidents. Engineer Shibe told even locally, the operators get a lot of fiber cuts. People, theft and all that stuff. But it's because this is massive, right? So it means that we need to build a next level of resilience in order to overcome these things. So it's not a prophet or doom, it's a reality of life. We have to be pragmatic. It's this, for me, is a wake-up call for us in Africa. We need to raise the level of our infrastructure to the next level, right? We've been operating here and then we'll be hit by a disaster, right? So now we need to think, okay, how do we go there so that when there's a next disaster, we are ready for it? So that's the way we should think about it. And that is the kind of element that we start thinking we need to do both at city level, at country level, and at the continental level.
But I also want to get something from you. Listen, that satellite shouldn't be seen as the answer to all, but just like a backup, rather.
Right. So right? Yes, you can also have satellite as the main in certain cases. Let me give you an example. So if, let's say, you have a project in Navrongo, right? In Navrongo, the cost of building a fiber network from Accra to Navrongo will be much, much higher than if you drop a satellite from a satellite provider into Navrongo. So in that case, using satellite as a primary will make more sense. And then maybe you have a radio link as a backup. And then as Navrongo becomes more economically empowered, you can have a basis to build a fiber network there. Because, the biggest cost in building fiber is the civil works. So you have to dig the ground, you have to get permits from the government, you have to create, defense for building the infrastructure so people don't steal the, physical fiber when you put it there. You have to bury it or you have to put it on a train tracks. Or if you're building roads, you build the ducting and then you run a fiber tree. So these are very physical activities that comes with cost. When you put it under the seabed, you put it on a boat, on a ship that goes through the sea and then lays it. Sometimes they just put it on a seabed or they bury it a little bit. Even in this case, some of the cables that we're talking about were buried, right? They were not just lying on the seabed. Some of them were buried, or you still had a cut. Right? So if you're going to then build that fiber all the way to places like Tamale, then you must have there must be the market to justify that kind of investment. So it's also important to see this from, it has to make economic sense for investors to invest in that infrastructure in order to deliver the services. So there is always an investment requirement. And if you don't have the economics to back that, then another way of thinking about it, you need to find sort of soft money, i.e., government, money or money from, less commercial sources that can underwrite some of this. Because sometimes the argument can be made that you need to build the infrastructure in order to get the market. or the market needs to be there for you to get the infrastructure there, right? So it can be a chicken and egg situation, and I will not deny the argument that in certain cases you need sort of soft capital that allows you to then grow the market for commercial capital to come in.
The bankers are insidious. I'll get back to them on that one. But I want to just a quick one before I come back into my studio as well. In all these things, regulation is a critical factor here. Are we getting it right, or we are still in the, sorry for my choice of words, the 1960s?
We're not in the 1960s. I think that our regulator has come a very long way. If you remember, many years ago in the ISP world, 20 years ago, we couldn't, have a lot of this conversation with our regulators. So regulation-wise, we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. I think that in the 21st century, regulation has become more proactive and become more user-centric. So as a regulator, you should be thinking about elements around how do the users get the optimal best from the operators when they apply for a service. So for example, if people cannot make calls, if people's data runs out too fast, if people are not getting the elements of good customer service, these are the things that a regulator should concern itself a lot about, because they are the ombudsman for the user. So in the 21st century, regulation is moved in a different direction where you need to become more consumer-facing and become a channel to drive customer delight. Right? Because at the end of the day, if customers are not able to get good service, you lose trust in that, utility. And once you lose trust in that utility, as my colleague said, you begin to go down the rabbit hole. So as a regulator, your inclination is, how do I make sure that people get the best service at an affordable price, and obviously not at the detriment of the operators, right? We're not saying that, you should drive prices to make it too cheap so that operators don't make money. The operators have to make money to invest in infrastructure to deliver the service, but it needs to be a balancing act. And as a regulator, that's what you are, the referee of the game, right? That's what you should, that's your power. That's what you should be focused on majority of the time.
Eric, I'll come back to you. Hold on. Engineer, already I've heard personnel within the regulatory space talking about the fact that, well, maybe it might not be out of space to compensate your customers. Is it fair to be talking about compensation now?
What are you defining as compensation? That's
for the loss that they experienced during that period, or not being able to.
I'm answering your question.
Yeah.
So you have an act of God. You know what force
established by
what force majeure is?
Established. I know, but as said now, we've not still been able to establish that.
No,
it is a force majeure.
No, without a doubt, it's been said that, from the remote assessment that has been done, that this is definitely geological catastrophe that has happened. So that has been done. What you want to do is the nature of the force majeure. Even in a route situation, that could be force majeure. So you have the situation again. So you need to look at the customers a bit well. For the subsea suppliers that are regulated by the industry, they have been hit by force majeure. So the operators have to buy service from them. The person who supplies you has been hit by force majeure, an act of God. So there's definitely nothing that you can do than to ensure that you bring back service. But let's look at it. A lot of our services now, what has happened is that you have data sitting there, you could not use it. But now you could go back and use it. So what you're seeing our members do is not about compensation. It's about people whose data they couldn't use during that period that expired, reinstating that for them. So that's what has been done, because the person has bought the data, he's not used it for that period, and the time has passed. So because of an act of God. So you bring that back. But for some of the network providers, the data does not expire. So it means what you've bought, you've not used, is there. So we need to definitely know that this is not one of the things that was in the control of anybody else. For really
If the necessary remedies were still in place, quickly moved on.
I am telling you, I'm giving you an example of the fact that in May 2020, the NCA gave a directive that moved from your 1 cable to 3 cables. You see? And so can you imagine that we're sitting here? Then, and I've done that when I was sitting here. When lightning would hit us at Ashwease, Joy FM will go down. So as an advertiser, I am not able to, your advert that was supposed to go at 6 p.m., it does not go. You know what that is? It's an act of God. So what Joy FM will do for you is that, or Multi TV will do for you is that they will reschedule that ad again. And this is exactly what it is that has happened. At this stage, for us as industry, we've not been thinking about cost. We've been thinking that what do we do to restore service? Because we understand that this is a utility, this is a human right. People, you know that there were people actually currently that hospitals that are using, this, like this exactly to do
health insurance is riding.
Even apart from that, there's a conversation we are having between a Singaporean hospital and a hospital in Kumasi where they want to use mixed augmented reality and AI to be able to do surgeries remotely. That's where we've gotten to. So we completely understand it as an industry that this is a human right. It's even before water and electricity. So you need to do it. But when you are hit by an act of God, you cannot be talking about competition.
But now, so I'm just saying that, and sorry for that it's been established independently that it was an act of God.
Oh, definitely.
And therefore,
definitely.
Based on by which the regulator,
so you,
of course,
yes.
the regulator has to verify and understand that
yes. You see, and
this
again,
was indeed an act of God.
Yes, again,
and even an act of God, there are still supposed to be instances where insurance could also set in to help.
No, so you see, again, let me give you a typical example, a very painful example. One of my friends died out of COVID. They had an insurance policy. When we went, nobody had thought about COVID. So workmen compensation does not cover it. This particular situation, where you have 4 cables going down, how are you going to insure that? What is the premium going to be for that? It is, so I'm sure Eric spoke about it. We've had cables. You have 1 cable go down somewhere, cables that are within. Now you're talking about 4 cables that are in a span of 160 kilometers. How are you going to insure that? So you can't transfer that risk. A risk that, really speaking, if this in my life as an engineer, I really have not thought about the situation where, because when I saw the NCA in April 2020, asked the MNOs to do 3 cables. They said physical connection to 3 submarine cables. I'm like, why would you want us to do 3 cables? But now you're looking at it and saying, well, even 4 cables could fail. So this is definitely something that nobody really thought about. It is just like, again, saying that we should try and insure against COVID or insure against lightning. You know that, there are some places where, based on your lightning report, nobody will insure lightning. So it's similar. That's the situation that we found ourselves in again. And again, I'm sure in a few days, all of us will be educated. The thing about engineering, I think about science again, God really shows it to us. That as we think that we're pushing, He exposes other things. So I'm sure hopefully we'll go down there, we'll go and see, this is what really happened.
Mr. Ward, there's talk about investing in local data backups. There's a financing bit as well. Yeah. None that the banks themselves have seen this challenge. This is not free capital, though. Could that also change your posture towards financing commercially viable projects that are seeking to build these reserves and localize these programs and all those things?
Projects such as these are no-go areas. Not at all. If you talk to the fintechs, it's a different story. They will tell you that most of them, even for the products that they are just testing the market, there are some banks that are behind them. But one thing I would say, and the point that Eric made, which I 100% agree with him on, about localizing some of these applications. And it goes beyond that. The entire business model of these, some of these service providers, we need to rethink how these businesses are modeled. I remember in my previous life, we were going through an RFP for an app, and we invited, people, these companies to bid. there were 4 local companies. The cheapest of the 4 local companies was around $800,000. There were only one foreign company, it was an Indian company. Their quote was $146,000.
Wow.
For the same scope, same service, same job, and as I speak, I won't name the application, it is still functional. At $140,000, Visa against $800 and over for the least cost of the local provider. So we need to rethink how we price the service, how we model the business, and what kind of things go into our pricing mechanism. Sometimes it's surprising that it's not by accident that people are going offshore to source these products.
Some are saying that the banks are maybe the worst culprit because your international modeling and everything sometimes compels you. You're having a call center being hosted way in Asia for a bank here. And I won't mention the name. I was trying to process a facility or do my card system and all the rest of the bank. And it was being processed way in India. And the bank was waiting for an email response to that. And I was like, really?
George, we have to come to terms with it. We are in a connected world.
Okay.
We are in Ghana here where we have call centers for US companies.
Yeah.
Companies in the United States have their call centers. In Ghana, we are in a connected world. You have to make yourself attractive enough to have that critical mass that gives you that average cost of production lowering so that you can have economies of scale and attract these kind of massive transaction flows all across the world. We cannot say, oh, Ghana should be in Ghana. Things are happening around us. We are participants, whether we like it or not, we are participants in the global economy. So we need to be focusing on making ourselves more competitive in this era. The era where the average Ghanaian thinks that if I'm in business, my profit margin must be 100%. When somebody in India is thinking about scale and his profit margin is about 10%, we need to begin asking and rehashing these concerns that people are bringing to us. That are we overlayering, overbearing our customers because sometimes we find ourselves to be maybe one or two of the players in the environment, and therefore, no matter what, you have no choice. The choice is out there. Now the market is not within borders. The market is a global market.
Think global, act local.
Yes, you think global, you act local, and then you build the necessary redundancies to help you go global.
So I get from you that, listen, the banks are committed to supporting the necessary
100%.
financing for this infrastructure that has to be built. So when the opportunity presents itself, bankable, commercially viable projects, you're going to finance.
I'm telling you, it is ongoing. It's something that the banks are already doing.
Oh, I see.
Like they are going to do. They are doing as we speak.
Engineer, regulation. When I asked Osiakan, and I'll ask you because you find yourself in a very interesting position as well. Are we getting there, or a lot more still needs to be done? Because in all these things, the question about regulation, we cannot throw it aside when we have to do all the things right.
I mentioned some examples of some works that the regulator had done so far as this was concerned. Let me give you another example that is not within our sector, that's in the banking sector. So at some point, Bank of Ghana asked that all these foreign cards should be doing processing locally. Yeah. And I'm sure one of those conversations were being, people were looking at it, why are you saying we should do that? So yes, regulation is happening, but the interesting thing is that crisis like this, gives you an opportunity. So I'm hoping that with this, and for me, that engagement that happened with the regulator, bringing everybody, NCA, everybody together, that's a conversation that should happen. But the interesting thing is that the conversation ought to go beyond just the telecommunication regulator. The other regulators need to sit together. Bank of Ghana, the insurance people, the agri people, everybody needs to come together to see that with where we are going as an interconnected world, and with all the redundancy things that we've all talked about that needs to be done, how do we do this but still remain relevant globally? How do we do that and still be able to create opportunities for us? One of these things that crisis has brought for us is the issue of local content so far as these apps and things are concerned. Now it's going to make it a lot more interesting for people to want to use things that are local and hosted here. Our attitude about cloud in the recent past, before this crisis, people are even beginning to force some regulators to say, allow us to use, and when they say cloud, they don't want to use the local cloud. Currently, NITA has a tier 4, data center here. If we had it to the extent that even all the state enterprises were mandated to use that particular, NITA, which is a state-owned data center, a lot of the challenges we found would not have happened. So how do we start even from when it comes to government procurement, the regulation around that, to help so that we make sure that we're using our locally built up, using our locally based services, but also being able to leverage on international things. And again, that's what John talked. We can't live as if we are living in a cocoon. So we need to get all of those things done. We need to, all of us now, also start thinking that it is strategically important to start looking at the issues of some of these data centers. If you are going to do data centers, your power supply ought to be good. Not only to be consistent, also ought to be clean. The cost at which you put in terms of even, currently, look at how much we pay for electricity. So you need to start looking at all of that and start looking at some of these things as being investment. So government will have to start meeting us. Government might not build this infrastructure, but they have to put in, the enabling environment. Make sure that the physical space is there. If I am going to be able to do some of these investment that will build this resilience for me, what incentives do you give me to enable some of these things to happen? So this thing really gives us an opportunity for all of us to actually look ourselves in the face and say, what are the things that we can do differently to ensure that we build this resilience that would enable us to be competitive. And again, when we start doing this conversation, it's important that we don't look insular and just look Ghana. We need to start looking ECOWAS, because sometimes some of these things are such that our numbers in Ghana would not make economic sense for us to be able to do it. Yeah. But once you start looking at ourselves within the ECOWAS framework, and now you have AfCFTA also coming in, and these services are going to go like that. So this is the time for us as Africans to start seeing how do we do so that we can build some of this. Because you see, most of us, almost every country has electric networks. Yeah. Most of us have power electric networks that are close to our borders. Nothing stops us from saying that, for ECOWAS, for example, what we're going to do is to say that for all these grids that we are going to put our terrestrial fiber over it, and we're going to make sure that there is some interconnection within it. And because most of these facilities are state-owned, you can do it so that it is not an extra cost to anybody. And then you make it available to all operators that when anything happens, we can move and pool resources.
And Doc, just to get this from you, I mean, we've talked about consumers and compensation, but for the providers as well, there's been some huge losses as a result of this. So again, can we quantify that?
No, at this stage, what we've done is that we are not even looking at costing of it yet. Because I can tell you that there are bandwidths that you are buying for like $11,000 a month that is being sold to you now at $18,000 a month. Because of the fact that you are not using me. Now you are coming to me. And you see, the deals you do with me will not be your 2 years, 4 years deals. Yeah. You'll be saying that, let me do this for like 6 months. So it's come at a cost. But at this stage, it's not that, as they say in Cree, at this stage, it's about making sure that you can get, the networks built, resilient, let your customers, then you start. Government, I'm sure, would also start counting the cost of even those 2 days that people were not able to, use data, the CST losses. All of those will happen, but this is not the time for it. Let's get the networks, let's get the systems working, and then I'm pretty sure...
Let me go to Eric Osieko. In a minute, Eric, I mean, you talked about investments, and as we try and wrap up, should it be private sector-led or state-led? And for you, what should be done going forward? If you can wrap this up for me in 2 minutes, I'll be so grateful.
It should be both. It's not one or the other. As I said, you need a combination of public money and private money in order to make this investments work. So, when I was speaking, it needs to be a public-private partnership, but it needs to be done in a way that optimizes the private sector. In other words, you need to use public money to crowd in private capital to build it out more extensively, but you have to do it in a way that is affordable to the end user. And so, for example, you need to avoid multiple investments in the same fiber infrastructure in the same region. We take Accra, for example. You want to make sure across one route, they are not all the fiber going that direction, but it goes to different places and goes to different parts of the city.
Okay.
So the way you apply the investment and the way you build the network architecture needs to change. But George, I wanted to kind of emphasize a point that I made, which is important. If you take a lot of this infrastructure that we have, there is redundancy, which is, you have one cable and you have satellite. What we're talking about now is resilience, which is sort of another level that we're going to.
Yeah.
So I want to make it clear that we're not saying there's no redundancy. There is some redundancy in all the networks that are there. But this has taught us that redundancy is not enough. We need to get to resilience.
Okay. All right. Engineer, in a minute, your final thoughts in a minute.
I think that we just also have to ensure that we take advantage of this crisis and learn out of it and make sure that we are able to go beyond what it is that we have done. And there has to be a lot of conversation amongst all of us because it's, again, this has exposed that it's not just the providers, it's the users as well. There has to be a change of the way we do things that we ought to do. So we all need to come together and try and find ways in which we say, never again with even 8 cables going down, would we also go down again. It will require a lot of innovation. It will require a lot of stakeholder engagement. It will require a lot of changing in the way we do our funding, changing in our tax regimes. We ourselves as industry, a lot of introspection and working together amongst ourselves a lot more to make sure that, again, and I will borrow from what Eric ended with, moving away from redundancy to really resilient systems that are able to...
Mr. Wah, in a minute, banks, more funding for us. I'm sorry, but just in a minute on that one.
Yeah, no problem. The thing is, this has taught us, all of us, a big lesson that you can't say you are okay until the entire system is okay. So you need every player within the ecosystem to be playing to similar roles. So it cannot be that because we are as banks, highly regulated, we are investing in all these building all these redundancies, and we are plugged into networks and into other platforms that do not have similar stringent regulation to compel some investments in building those kind of redundancies. In the end, the customer knows the bank. He doesn't know who is helping the bank to provide the service. And therefore, it's in the interest of the ecosystem to ensure that that redundancy is available.
Mr. Wah and Dr. Engineer Shibe Eric-Osiko, I appreciate your time so much. I know that the debate will go on in your homes and offices, whether we are now better prepared than ever before or never again. Well, this has been PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.